now, our special guest, Colonel John Alexander.
Dr. John Alexander has been a leading advocate for the development of non-lethal weapons since he created the renewed interest in the field starting in 1989. In 2003, he served as a mentor to Afghan Ministry of Defense senior officials through the Office of Military Cooperation in Afghanistan, coalition forces in Kabul. He's traveled to all eight, and I'll let you explain that when the time comes, of the continents of the earth. He's trekked to remote areas of Tibet, including Mount Everest Base Camp, went to Timbuktu and Sahel in West Africa, tracked guerrillas in Rwanda, met shamans in the Amazon, Mongolia, and voodoo witch doctors in Togo and Benin. He's traveled across cartel-controlled areas of Central America, visited ancient temples in Burma, Laos, Thailand, and Cambodia. In New Guinea, he witnessed the emergence of Stone Age tribes people who still practice cannibalism on occasion, and in 2014 was swimming in the open ocean with humpback whales in the Kingdom of Tonga. The Stone Age people, that sounds pretty interesting if you ask me. Okay, in 2015, he attended the Kumbh Mela in Nashik, India, visited Bali, Borobudur in Indonesia, and was diving on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. In 2016, highlight was driving with great white sharks off of Isle de Guadalupe in Mexico. In 2019, he traveled through Central Asia, meeting with shamans in remote Kyrgyzstan, Samarkand, and Uzbekistan. In May 2023, he returned from visiting eastern Turkey, including Göbekli Tepe, believed to be dated to over 9,000 BC, and the newly discovered Karahan Tepe, thought to be 2,000 years older. He entered the Army as a private in 1956, rose to the ranks of Sergeant First Class, attended OCS, Officer Candidate School, and was a Colonel of Infantry in 1988 when he retired. During his varied career, he held many key positions of Special Operations, Intel, and Research and Development. From 1966 through 1969, he commanded Special Forces Alpha Team in Vietnam and Thailand. His last military assignment was Director, Advanced Systems Concept Office, U.S. Army Lab Command. After retiring from the Army, Dr. Alexander joined Los Alamos National Laboratory, where he was instrumental in developing the concept of non-lethal defense. As a program manager, he conducted non-lethal warfare briefings at the highest levels of government, including the White House staff, National Security Council, members of Congress, Director of Central Intelligence, and senior defense officials. He also met with heads of industry, presented at academic institutions, including Columbia, Harvard, and MIT. In 2004, he was invited to address the German Bundestag. In 2005, he went to The Hague and addressed international delegates to the Chemical Warfare Convention. Dr. Alexander's doctoral committee was chaired by the legendary Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. He is a past president of the International Association of Near-Death Studies. He's the founding member of the International Remote Viewing Association and a 3-term council member of the Society for Scientific Exploration. In the 1980s, while on active duty, Colonel Alexander created and coordinated the Advanced Theoretical Physics Group to study UFOs. In 1995, he joined the National Institute for Discovery Science and was the first NIDS member at Skinwalker Ranch. Dr. Alexander wrote the seminal material on non-lethal warfare. He's published articles in Harvard International Review, Jane's International Defense Review, the Boston Globe, the Futurist, Washington Post, and several other journals. He's appeared frequently on television, including Dateline, Fox News, Larry King, CNN, MSNBC, Newsweek, and other U.S. programs, plus international television in Australia, Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, Brazil, Switzerland, the Netherlands, the UK, and Japan. Academically, he holds an MA from Pepperdine University, a PhD from Walden University, and later attended the Anderson School of Management at UCLA, the Sloan School of Management at MIT, and the Kennedy School of Government Program, National and International Security for Senior Executives at Harvard. In addition to many military awards for valor in service, Aviation Week and Space Technology selected him as a 1993 Aerospace Laureate, and in 1997 introduced him into the Hall of Fame at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. He received a Department of Energy Award Excellence for the Nuclear Weapons Program in 1994 and is listed on Who's Who in America, Who's Who in Science and Engineering, American Men and Women of Science, In 2001, he was named to the OCS Hall of Fame at Fort Benning. OCS is Officer Candidate School. During 2001 and 2002, he was a member of the National Research Council Committee for Assessment of Non-Lethal Weapons Science and Technology. He served with the Army Science Board for a recent decade. Yeah, and he served for the Army Science Board, sorry. For a recent decade, he was a senior fellow at the Joint Operations University. In 2012, he received a Knowlton Award from the Military Intelligence Corps. Currently, he's a private consultant. His books include The Warrior's Edge, Future War, Non-Lethal Weapons in the 21st Century Warfare, Winning the War, Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities, and Reality Denied, Firsthand Experiences of Things That Can't Happen But Did. So on that, I think we've run out of time. Colonel Alexander, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. We really appreciate it.
That is an amazing bio.
Yeah,
okay.
Well, I didn't expect you to read it all.
The floor is yours, sir.
All right. Let me start. I start with all my slides of the bias, and my bias is, as you see here, remote viewing, ions, there's near-death studies, see the interspecies communications, after-death communications, psychokinesis, et cetera, and down the lower right, even cryptozoology. And it is my view that all of these things are connected. Also, we give a lot of talks in interesting groups, the UFO groups. My doctorate did a lot of work with near-death studies. I was the president of IONS for a while. I've dealt with shamans, and then, of course, the remote viewing you heard IRBA. It's kind of interesting. It's getting better, but for a long time, these groups were all operating as if independent and different. And it's, again, I think all of this is interrelated. Now, let me start with my position is that UFOs must exist. That just means there's something flying that you see that we don't understand. So it doesn't mean what they are. And I'm assuming the group here, by the way, I'm going to go pretty quickly through a number of things. I'm assuming this group has a pretty good background in the area already. Again, physical reality is simply overwhelming. Those who claim there are no evidence, as you hear, that means they really haven't looked. Now, the bottom line of something we'll return to is whatever this is, it is terribly complex, much more than we give credit for. Now, I start with the groups usually and say, how do you define a UFO? And as I said, things flying, but you got little balls of light. We've got hard craft miles across and everything in between. And therein, I think, lies the problem that, and when I come down and talk later about the Ichi hypothesis, but in my view, it's just too simple unless Earth is on the galactic bucket list of places that people have to visit. Now, the question keeps coming up, are we alone in the universe? The answer is no. This is every star out there. By the way, the number in this is dated. I did hear Neil deGrasse Tyson the other night saying, a billion trillion. Actually, 19 sextillion is 19 with 21 zeros after it. So that means just from a pure mathematical perspective, there's got to be life out there that would have evolved and be kind of parallel to where we are. But that's not really the issue today. This is what I call my the spectrum of beliefs from on the lower left, you see debunkers. And most people who came to be skeptics are actually debunkers. You have skeptics, which I think is a reasonable position if you don't know what it is. Then up there, UFOs exist, crashes and retrieval. ARV is the alien re-engineered vehicle. And the interesting thing is in the lower right, it was actually a Roper poll that was done a number of years ago, and that was a global poll in which we had about 20% of the people saying not only is ET alive or out there, but here among us and walking around. So a very high percentage of people believe that. Now, the Pentagon says, my point is, the Pentagon says nothing. It's a big stone building. There's lots of people, about 29,000 people with at least 30,000 different opinions, and don't agree. You probably know the history on this, Signed Grudge Blue Book that went through there. The Advanced Theoretical Physics, I'll cover that in a little bit more detail because that's the group that I put together in the 1980s. Then by now, you know of the OSAP and ATIP programs, and of course, and we'll address the ARRO, the Aerospace Anomalies Research Office. There's some interesting things that go along with each of these. So there's good news and the bad news is the government doesn't know what the government knows. But I think one of the areas that's misunderstood lightly is most of them really don't care. Now, there are some people who are interested, and usually the MUFON group in particular, I think this is the most important thing. Sorry, that is not a commonly held view in the Pentagon. They have as many diverse views as any other group that's out there. And this is what I call the Washington paradox, and that is that most people think that Washington is totally inept, except for UFOs, where they believe them to be omniscient. How do these programs get started? Frankly, most of it is personal interest as opposed to being top down. In other words, it's not some edict that comes out or senior directives that do it. I've listed three here. What I did was where I put it together, kind of what you know, Lou Elizondo and Jim Lukoski with OSAP and ATIP. Again, bottoms up approach. We can discuss some of that if you want. And there's some support and a lot of civilian inquiries. I do recommend this is by George and Column and Lukoski, a great book on skinwalkers at the Pentagon. We'll touch on skinwalkers a bit. As you did hear in the intro, I was with Bob Bigelow the day he bought the ranch, was the first one from NIDS to actually spend the night there. Now, one thing that I think is greatly misunderstood, and that is the difference between personal interest and institutional responsibilities. The point here is, as I said, we've got about 4 million government workers. If we believe the Gallup poll, 12%, that means about 480,000 of them have had what they believe to be a UFO sighting. People did investigate, and that did not, until very recently, make it actually a government responsibility. Okay, what did we do? And this started in '84. Actually, it continued on after I retired and went into Los Alamos. Participants from all of the services, from the IC, intelligence community, including CIA, DIA, NSA, and aerospace industry. We all had the TS, and what you know is a special or above top secret clearance, SCI. It was a good old boy net, and meaning we knew everybody and whatnot. And there were supposed to be no written records. At this time, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, had been enacted for a while, and there were a huge number of inquiries about UFOs. That's one of the reasons I chose the topic, advanced theoretical physics, because I didn't think people would ask for that. What we found was not at all what we were looking for. And basically, nobody was officially minding the story. Now, we're going to get to the legacy program in some detail in a bit. But at that time, again, all of these agencies were in representatives. Everybody knew kind of the background and, you know, the major cases. But everybody all says, oh, I thought you were doing that, or somebody else was responsible. So the suspected scenario was Roswell was real. They had looked at it at the time and done research and says, what the hell, can't figure this out, and packed it away like the Raiders of the Lost Ark and Suitland. You saw the end of the movie when they're tucking it away. That was the Lost Ark, but tucking it away at Suitland or some other place. The Condon report, I think, is actually quite important and deserves it. Now, the problem was this. Condon was right, because the question to Condon was not, are there UFOs and that? The question was, is there a threat? And we have not seen any threat emerge. Importantly, in the book, though, Condon didn't actually participate in the study, but he did write the recommendations and conclusions. And there's pieces of that study that are actually pretty good, because the conclusions are inconsistent with the material that's in the body of the text. One problem I found as I was briefing kind of up the food chain, the scientific community assumed that this was a really serious study. And in fact, it wasn't. It was basically, you consider lunch money by Department of Defense standards. But the point was, for the Air Force, remember this is 69, it did exactly what they wanted. Just make this go away, because an action passed is an action handled. And they didn't want to be spending more money on it. So what did we know? Well, we'll talk to some of these things. I want to mention one of the key factors that's going to arise, and I mentioned early on, is this consciousness connection. And at the time we were looking at it, was purely as a physical kind of thing, cases, widgets flying. What was demonstrated? Now, the time frame on this, again, is 1980s. But we knew you had instantaneous acceleration. We had the high G right angle turns that no human or living organism could survive. The G forces would do it. They had stealth in that they appeared and disappeared. Remember, stealth was a big issue in the 1980s. We had just uncovered the stealth fighters and that. We also had interruptions with electrical systems that were without damage and didn't understand that much. There were credible witnesses, and they had, again, remember that time frame, 1980, military witnesses, astronauts, and you had multiple witnesses between, a couple of people watching and thousands, contrary to most belief, that it ranged from seconds to hours, and sometimes recurred for days to months, and some of them were very close. I got to Jim Hennison and Bent Waters, but up to physically touching. Physical evidence, lots of physical evidence, radar photos and whatnot. And there were some metal samples even at that time. One of the early cases, by the way, the slides that you're looking at, except for where you see the big hard writing, I just added that date on there. But these are the actual briefing slides that I was using in the 1980s. This RB-47 case was really interesting because it lasted for about 90 minutes. And you see where the guys were flying around. You had objects above, objects below. You had radar confirmation. And this thing comes down and is tracking it. What's unique also about this case is this was an early, what we call ELINT bird, electronic warfare. And the point here was they had receptors, and they got about a 3 gigahertz signature out of that. And that led to some people actually making sensor systems to try to intercept those signals. From satellites, again, 1980s, this shows 1984. What you have is a DPS satellites in geosynchronous orbit. The point is the field of view is staring at the Earth. So it's very high and a very cold regime. And over on the right side, you can see here, this something flew by that was quite warm in a very close regime. Now, the reason it gets darker is the object is going down towards the Earth. They studied it intensely and came up with a what the hell. I have no idea what it is. This is another one that was kind of interest. And this is an IR signal, a heat signal. Now, what you're seeing over here, that's what SeaTac Airport. So you're seeing what jet engines look like going up. The point out is Point Barrow and out in the Aleutians, again, a very cold area and huge heat dumps. They had those periodically, have no idea what it is or why the satellites were picking them up. The point is that this stuff from a satellite perspective was available early on. I was visiting NORAD headquarters, probably early 80s, and thought I'd be a smart ass. So I asked the question, this is a mixed briefing, so it wasn't classified. But I said, well, do you get things accelerate, make sharp turns and that? And the guy looks at me and goes, UFOs, yes. And the point was, and then at that time, since 71, this would be into the 80s, the system had tracked over 7,000 reports. We can come back to the NORAD because turns out on my last job, the commanding general, when we created laboratory command, and I reported directly to him, but he had been a staff officer at NORAD. Staff, they always had a BG, a brigadier general, as a like officer of the day, a staff officer. He had no idea what I was talking about. It was like literally eyes glazing over. So that tells you something about NORAD. And now the Cash Landrum case is one that's interesting. Again, I'm going to assume that you know about this. 29 December 1980, Betty Cash and Landrum and boy Cody are all out there driving. All this is near Houston, Texas. And they see this craft. And the interesting piece about it is that there's 22 to 23, the number varies, of helicopters that are supposedly circling the craft. Now, what happens is, they supposedly stop on the road, they look out, and the injuries that occur are entirely consistent with their story. Betty Cash got out of the car in the front, gets whole body radiation. Landrum stands behind the door, so she's partially lost, gets some radiation. Cody, who's now a man and talks about this sometimes, saw the thing and jumps in the back seat of the car, so minimal radiation. They were seriously irradiated. So what happened was, because of the aircraft being seen around there and the damage that had occurred, they sued the U.S. government, went initially to the Air Force, and then to they said, well, those are Chinook helicopters, they're Army, so it came to DAIG. Now, one of my jobs was with the Department of Army Inspector General, so they knew I was crazy and interested in all this weird stuff. So I was asked about that. I can tell you this case, George Saran was the guy who got the case, looked at it extensively. Those helicopters were not there. He tracked down every helicopter in the Army and the Marine Corps, and he went so far as to look at helicopters for the petroleum industry, the ones that fly out in the Gulf. Those helicopters certainly did not exist, but I can tell you that a number of people definitely saw them. The JAL flight, Japan Airlines, which is really interesting. Again, this is 1986, so it came up on the thing. The point here is you had a JAL flight flying along. They have a UFO that's tracking it. You got confirmation from, this is air traffic control in Anchorage. Elmendorf is confirming it. They said the other site, that was probably Cobra Dane. And it was tracked for, I said, a long period of time, very large. says larger than aircraft carriers. This went on for 50 minutes. He did report it. My point at the bottom, and this applies to what's going on now, some dramatic shift. And JAL fired the pilot for embarrassing the company. Never mind the facts involved. The 87 Alaskan reports, this is some things that came up. I did include them in my UFO book. Point is, never reported to anybody. They were found accidentally. Again, it was because that I had been in DAIG and we had an investigation, just an ongoing, totally unrelated, that somebody up there and some officer picked him up and said, well, what do we do with these? And it talks about sightings that had happened, again, in Imbel, Alaska. Won't go into all detail, but the point is that these were reported by Alaskan scouts. That's also a long story. They were just filed. There was no place to put it. As far as the accuracy, understand that the First Nation people who are up there were literally seal hunters and things. Their life depends on understanding the weather, and had things like you got objects that are quite large and flying against the wind. Gulf Breeze was another one, began in 86, lasted for years. Maybe familiar. Ed Walters is the guy who wrote, and in fact wrote the book. There's more than 100 witnesses to the case. One of the things that was interesting about that, you see in the lower right, at that time, the Gulf Breeze Sentinel is no longer in existence. The editor was given a bunch of pictures and try to decide what to do with them. These had come from Ed Walters. And he's looking at it, deciding, do I run the story? What do I do with this? And his parents came in and asked him, saw the pictures and said, well, what are these? And he says, well, there's some pictures. I don't know what to do with it. And he says, but that's what we saw. And so his object was, if I can't trust my parents, who can I trust in this? I did become a MIB at Men in Black at Gulf Breeze. That's a long story. We'll skip it. The Iranian case is also of interest. This was 76, and what happens? It's seen from the tower in Tehran that's out there. You have air-ground radar sightings. They set up 2 Iranian F-4s. Of course, they came from the U.S. And they all reported radio interference. What was the most of interest to me, and the general, the guy who went on, he survived the revolution, went on to become a general, and actually talked about this. But he goes in, he's running, and he's getting ready to fire missiles, AIM-9 missiles at it. When he did that, lost all control of his weapons panel and the communications, and he turns and he banks out. And when he did, the system came back up. Now, why that was of particular interest to me, I said in the last job as Director of Advanced System Concepts, I had all of the tactical directed energy that the Army was dealing on. That was the high power microwaves and lasers and then particle beams. But my point is, I know how to turn you off, don't know how to turn you back on again. So that's one that's been of interest. Yes, it was classified for a long time. The main reason it was classified is saying, hey, we do spy on our friends. So it wasn't the technical aspect so much as who we were gathering data against. Another case that came up in, this is May 86, is there is a retired Air Force pilot. He's flying an aircraft and he gets surrounded by UFOs, calls for help. They initially set up the F-5s, and then that later changed. This went on for, as you see, over 3 hours, and it was both over land and over the sea. And this Colonel Zingle was the guy, the retired colonel who was flying it. So we have lots of things. But what was really unique about this case is that the air minister went public and said, "Yea, verily, this happened, and nothing we can do about it, but that's okay." But it was very unusual to have the Minister of Air actually confirm that this was going on. I'm assuming you probably mostly know about the case, and I guess some of you are in the general area. Malmstrom and say this is this is the one where we got UFOs are reported by the ground crews up above, and the calls down. As you know, we'll get to George Salas in a minute. And he's down there, and in Echo Site, they have 6 to 8 out of 10 are going offline. They call back to NORAD SAC headquarters and said, "Can't talk to you. Echo Site is down 10 for 10. So the point is, you got lots of stuff. By the way, this was thoroughly examined. I talked to most of the people who were directly involved. Way beyond norm. And this was part of the nuclear triad. This is a strategic intervention of some kind that was not explained. I recommend George Salas he was then a captain at the time. He's been on a number of programs and that, wrote Fated Giant. If you want to find out what happened, I do recommend his book. When I say it gets stranger, actually, I was with George at a conference in Mexico. He turns out to later become a contactee after he retires, as UFOs show up in his house in California. There's a number of them, researchers who have switched from just observers to participants. U.S. wasn't alone. In '82, the Soviet Union, remember we're talking the bad old days here, so Ukraine is part of the Soviet Union, and a large craft seen over a missile site, hundreds of people, the hovers there for hours. But what was really of concern, now remember on ours, sites, the missiles started going offline. In their incident, they started spinning up, and they were going, and the launch commander was going, "My God, we're about to start World War III, and can't stop it." One of the things I can mention is the difference is we trusted our launch control officers, but the Soviets did not. So they had a centralized system for this to have spun up like this, meant it had to be controlled from Moscow. As Boris Sokolov was the colonel who investigated it intensely, never came up with a reason, or they literally disassembled the site. For those, I'm sure you're familiar with Bentwaters and Rendlesham Forest. I think this is actually one of the best cases. This is one of the few cases where the more you study it, the better it gets. And of course, in the upper right is Chuck Holt, who was then a lieutenant colonel and deputy base commander. At that time, Bentwaters was a joint US-UK base, and there were a number of sightings that took place, and it spanned several nights. And again, some of these were the same night, by the way, as what happened in the Cash Landrum case. What was interesting, well, the first sightings had happened. There was a lot of hullabaloo around the base about having seen a craft out there. They're having their annual Christmas party, and the provost marshal came in and got a hold of Chuck and said, "They're back." He says, "Who's back?" He says, "The UFOs are back." And he goes, "I'll take care of that. We understand this." In other words, we're going to resolve this for the first time. One of the worst decisions he ever made, isn't it? He also said, the people in the folklore said, "Oh, the Bentwaters helped his career." Actually, he was on fast track to 06, and he says this almost derailed him. But he they went out there, and he describes seeing this object floating through the trees along the splits into 5 parts. He goes zipping off. 2 come over and shoot laser beams at his feet. It's interesting. I had talked to Jim Pennison, who was the guy who went out on the first incident. So I said, I want to talk to you. He says, oh, you mean the ones I touched? Because he had actually walked up and put his hands on it. Again, this goes on. The evidence that supports the case gets stronger and stronger. What was not known to the public at the time, including the people in the UK, of course, the British military knew, this was the forward-most nuclear weapons storage area that we had. And they did describe this thing flying over and shooting beams into the storage area. So by now, when I first met Chuck, I had retired. I was at Los Alamos, and I had called him and arranged to meet. And he says, oh, I'm finally going to get debriefed. So no, I'm just here to ask about the cases. But one of the points was, he says nobody ever said anything to him about this incident. I said, well, did you pull a nuclear warhead just to see if it had been tampered with? And the answer was no. It would be too hard to explain what we're doing there. Well, Rebecca, he has also written a large book. There's volumes written on this case, but again, very, very strong. The Belgium case, and a number of sightings there close where you had Wilfred de Brouwer. I said chief of staff. He was actually a lieutenant colonel at the time, chasing these things, and they go zipping off. Exceeding 40 G's, 800, and definitely he goes on, rather than hurting his career, he goes on to become the chief of staff of the Belgian Air Force. But those were a series of cases that were very, very interesting. The major problem areas so we had was a signal noise issue. Meaning there was so much stuff being reported, and an awful lot of it was just literally noise cases that you run down and drawing the signal out. What are the critical cases was very difficult. The high strangeness factors involved. There were metal samples that were in there, but the chain of custody on them, and this is true on some of the material that has come to light, very recently, you don't have good provenance. It says reluctant witness. And I think one of the key issues, and one that has come up in the recent congressional hearings, is reporting UFOs was definitely not a career-enhancing move. This was a key one. What's interesting about this picture, that has been thoroughly examined, is that the UFO that you see, this is one of the few that are taken from the top down, and they've looked at the light on it, been thoroughly written. Interestingly, the people who took the picture did not see this. It wasn't until the aircraft had landed and were looking at the film that they found that the UFO was on there. This is a case I like to use when you look at Blue Book, and I think it was totally disgraceful. You had a B-52 was out on training missions, coming back in, it gets vectored. Brad Runyon was the pilot in this case. And so he gets sectored in, and they say, what are you looking for? And he says, well, you'll know it if you see it. And so they fly over, and they see this object. You see it kind of drawing in the upper right corner. As an object described as several hundred feet long, couple hundred feet in diameter, growing. Look at it. Turns out that something had come up and tracked the B-52. And it was on their radar in the lower right. What they did is take a Polaroid picture. So the center dot would be the B-52, and you got something behind it that's tracking it. The other aspect of it is that there were witnesses on the ground, so this is a very strong case. Really disgraceful. It did go to Blue Book. It's in the Blue Book files, and they said, "Oh, it was probably Venus. Venus was rising at the time." And Renion's response was, "Yeah, we flew over Venus." Won't go into all of these. Probably familiar with the various aircraft sightings that have gone on. There's more since. So in my projects, what happened is we were ad hoc. Everybody was paying their own way. We had decided that we wanted to transition to a funded program. So we went to, at that time, Star Wars, which was a $5 billion program, biggest program in all of DOD. And through a friend flag officer, I got to meet directly with General Jim Abramson, who was the director at that time. And this was, of course, the biggest program in all of DOD at the time. So we went in, and I had an entourage from various agencies, and we started by going around the room, who we were, where we came from, and that. And then I began UFO 101. And again, our idea here was, okay, we're going to become formalized. And we got, interestingly, about 10 minutes into the interview, he stops us and said, wait, who are you guys really? And we went back around the room and identified ourselves and the agencies and all of that. And we got done. He says, look, I'm doing a lot of hairy stuff, but I can't touch this, because the point was, if I get caught doing this, somebody's going to clip my budget for having too much money. Now, interestingly, they did lose $1 billion in the budgeting process following that. But clearly, like I say, the initial interview with Abramson was like a deer caught in the headlights. You had no idea what we were talking about. Another guy that came online was Bill Coleman. Got to know him pretty well. He was the former chief of staff of public information. One of the things that was interesting about that is, in order to get the job, he had to be interviewed by the Secretary of the Air Force, and he did. And the Secretary said to him, "Look, we got this UFO." The Blue Book was ongoing at the time, and Bill says, "You got to understand, I am not unbiased." And he had his own experience. Again, I wrote this out. There's several pages in the UFO book, but the point, short version, is he's a squadron commander at Greenville. They're flying a test flight from Greenville to near Fort Lauderdale, Florida, turn north to George Jacksonville, turn west and head back towards Mississippi. And as they're flying along, he's got some tech reps with him. And all of a sudden, they see up above him, about several thousand feet, the UFO. And they're looking at this, and all of a sudden, it drops down and it's on the deck. And they chased it. Bill took over the controls. The lieutenant that was flying the plane, he took over the controls, and they're literally at treetop level. And he's watching the circle moving across the ground. And one of them says, "Look, I'm an old farm boy, and I understand this dust and stuff. And this is flying so low that it's pulling up dust contrails behind it." It's interesting, they did report it, and when they went back, could not find it in Blue Book, even though it had been reported. By the way, he went on to work with Jack Webb on a UFO series. He had, excuse me, had collected over 100 cases that are high strangeness and high reliability. And we kept saying, okay, well, where are the cases? Well, I need to get them written down. Unfortunately, like many of these things, transitioned and had no idea where those files went, because they weren't passed on. Another guy that is absolutely critical to me is here we are with Dean Judd. Dean was chief scientist for SDI. He was later the NIO for science and technology, and we served on boards together. I brought him onto the NIDS board, and we also were advisors of SOCOM. We spent hours and hours and hours discussing this stuff, and he was a true skeptic, but was interested in the physical aspects of it. Absolutely no involvement in the ET or that what's known now as the legacy program, getting into the space program. Again, the NIO for S&T, if you understand how this was before DNI existed. This was the IC staff. And you can't go to the president and say, well, CIA thinks this, but DI thinks that. And, they've got to have a concerted position. So the NIO is responsible. Most of them are geographic, i.e. Europe, Asia, Middle East, Russia, etc. He was the one for science and technology. Don't think anybody ever briefed him on it. Firsthand, Edward Teller, the hydrogen bomb guy, personal friend. The picture there is at my house then in Santa Fe, and that's Hal Puthoff at me. And this is at the dinner table. Hal was talking to him about 0-point energy. Another guy I dealt with extensively with is Ben Rich, who was second president of SDI, and also many, many senior officials. I'm the one who briefed all of the three-letter agencies and some others, either the director or deputy director. One that I found most interesting, he's still alive, so won't reveal, but he was the head of one of those three-letter agencies, a lieutenant general at the time, and said, A, we don't do that. There's no requirement. But B, I'll tell you about the ones I saw. So here's a guy who's now agency head who has had personal experience but has not transitioned that. So I did a comparison between what we did in ATP and ATEP, and what you find is basically the same thing. Multi-sensory data, high witnesses, everything's going. We didn't, as you know, about the $20 million funding that went on and limited personal interest. And they got some hints as to what's going on. But the point is, we knew all that and talked to Lou about Lou Elizondo in some detail. Said, yeah, we were about 30 years ahead. What they did bring is new cases and better sensor systems, of course. They came up with the HF5 observables, the anti-gravity, no means of propulsion, instantaneous acceleration, hyper. On the right, well, this is one of the cases that I really like, and I was able to talk to him after it became known. That's another long story, but the point was, he was stationed out of Lakenheath, again, in 57, again, Cold War era, and they're on strip alert. He gets set off, and they said, again, what are you going to see? You'll know it if you see it. And he describes something as big as an aircraft carrier that's hovering over eastern UK. So he goes to Ripple. He had Mighty Mouse rockets at the time, and when he does, this thing zip, and it is in 2 sweeps of the radar, off of the radar scope, meaning it went from 0 to my calculations over Mach 500 nearly instantaneously. And again, this is 1957. So anybody who says, well, maybe this is, Russian or Chinese or something, they got to explain how you had Mach 500 in that time frame. The Corso conundrum is interesting. Again, this is a chapter in the UFO book, but we knew of Phil well before the book ever came out. The picture in upper right is as Hal Puthoff with Phil Corso, George Knapp, and myself. And we went to check it out. I did a 7-page letter. This is an addendum in the book and saying this is wrong, this is wrong. As you know, they tried to say that there's any number of technologies that were directly derived from Roswell, integrated circuitry being one, night vision and lasers being other. It just so happened that I knew the guy who literally created Night Vision Laboratory. And so I went to him and he asked about the story, Phil's story about alien eyeballs. They came out and that led to our night vision system. Total nonsense. It's interesting that Phil had a heart attack. My son was getting married and he lives in Palm Beach area. I went to see him down for the wedding. And the day before, we went up to see Phil, who had just had a major heart attack. And at that time, he had told me that he did need to correct all of the mistakes over there. He was right. Now, Phil was not computer literate. So he literally typed things out or handwritten. And unfortunately, less than 2 weeks later, had the second heart attack that was fatal. I'm going to assume I won't go through all of this, that you're, again, familiar with the Nimitz group encounters. This was 2004. These are the things that were brought up in the OSAP program. Sudden movements. Again, I'll assume you'll know Dave Fravor, who has, again, been before Congress, built a lot of programs on there, but he's the one who actually took the photos from the plane. They saw the infamous Tic Tac, and again from multiple aircraft. And one of the things that was interesting, though, is what they reported is that the craft, this is a drawing that's been added, but the UFO seemed to be interacting with something that was subsurface. Again, when you assess this was OSAP assessment on the Nimitz. The aircraft are unknown, not foreign, low observables, radar, etc. And again, we had known all of that decades before, but this was adding data to it. The Roosevelt Group, this is interesting because they're now off the East Coast and claiming it almost daily as they're preparing to go overseas. They're encountering UFOs that are there. You see a series of that were taking place. Well, one of the things that was interesting is that when they got deployed to the Persian Gulf, and if these didn't show up again. Oh, whoops. I'm not going. I'm assuming you've seen Go Fast, Gimbal. So we see them every day, morphing ones. So Arrow is then created, all the domain anomalies research. Now, one of the things is critical. It says all domain anomalies. It's not aerial or whatnot. And as you're seeing coming out, not already, there's a lot of other anomalies that get thrown in. Mentioned that Gillibrand, Warner, Marco Rubio was kind of a key, although he has kind of backed off of his statement on that now. But this is what they will focus on, very hardware oriented. In my view, their main mission is keep Congress off our ass, just make this stuff go away as much as you can. So I think the key questions are there more UFOs, or are there just more reports, or just better sensors? And of course, one of the two of the key issues is, can intent be determined? And of course, residual is a threat. This is a case from Jeremy Corbell, had over 29 palms in 2023. at Camp Wilson, what you see is lots and lots. Again, more than 50 witnesses, lasted over 10 minutes. Interestingly, arrows in existence at the time, and this does not get investigated. The key researchers I'll talk to, still dealing with Gary, who actually believes that UFOs or the aliens are here and continue to. Now, the issue that comes up at the moment, the key one, of course, is there a legacy program? And of course, Roswell suggests it is. Key people disagree. Material science has been looked at and does look very interesting. Some credibility has come along with our Avi Loeb at Harvard and created the Galileo project. They're looking at it kind of intensively. You may have seen the movie. If not, I would recommend it. The Age of Disclosure that came out in November of last year. Now, this is primarily Lou Elizondo and Jay Stratton. Lou, I'm assuming you know, like Jay was naval intelligence, now retired, and was the head of the program where all of the LSAP and ATAP came together. Now, UFOs are not the greatest story never told. Disclosure, in my view, has happened and happened and happened, and the community won't take yes for an answer. There's how many times it takes your many of the key people who have all come forward, many countries, just said, at least this exists. The countries have happened, and we were told that you can't disclose this because terrible things will happen if the public is made aware of these issues. And that's been kind of the global response as a time. It's been a ho-hum, and that includes, we'll get to what happened today. One of the key issues, and this gets a disclosure, in 1947, General Nathan Twining is then a major general who's the head of Air Force intelligence, and he wrote what's known as the Twining Memo. It was secret at the time, later is top secret. And he says, you know, hey, phenomena is real, it's not fictionary or visionary. What's interesting to me is, and this is written to the Air Force classified line, there's no indication talk about Roswell and certainly not crashes or bodies, even though this is immediately following that period. So why wouldn't and now have reluctant, I say, why wouldn't you investigate? So investigators are reluctant. Potential for embarrassment. I think your probability of success is, as I said, low, is almost non-existent. And you do run into, do not dismiss this, it's demonic. And I've added the picture here. I mean, that's J.D. Vance, the vice president, within the last few weeks. Whatever this is demonic. And we ran into this in several programs. Yes, you can do that, but it's work of the devil. Legitimate reasons for classification is they don't tell you how good your sensors are. Now, one of the things that happened after I accepted to do this, unexpectedly on 8 May, we started getting the documents that were released. And I'll come to in a minute. I did not know that documents would come out yesterday and have to address some of those. But again, if you look at the time frame on 1945, a lot of this is just old stuff. The initial one, and if you want it, you can go to www.war.gov/UFO. Reports are there, but it's not a searchable routine. You can't go in and find those things. You've got to go on each report and bring it up. Many agencies reporting, and there's almost no analysis or context to it. They did have some video. The one on the right there is where there's a picture that was released where it's a real location, but they added a drawing to it. Of some interest, were astronaut sightings of seeing firefly kinds of things and that. What you don't find in any of the reports is an explanation. Yeah, I had to get busy this morning. I literally drew the slide in response to what was coming out. I understand there's 51 videos. I just grabbed the photo that some have. That's kind of what you see. There are some reports of UFOs flying in dimensions. You do see them splitting into different areas, and then some morphing, going back together. Interesting, the green fireball is one of the center of attention. What surprises me there is this was over Sandia, or a lot of them were at a time. This was very, very well known, widely reported. There is an interesting case of a senior official within the last couple of years reporting being out flying around, seeing a thing. One of the things that caught my attention is we were flying map of the Earth. That's MAP of the Earth, not NAP of the Earth. So I was just wondering how familiar he is with the flying. What you don't see are reports of alien bodies or crash retrievals. And what I've added in there in the yellow is that some components of the U.S. government knows that some UFPs are non-anthropomorphic vehicles. That's an analysis from a very high individual that I borrowed from. Being cynical, I think it's an unsuccessful distraction because it's barely made the news in any area. Didn't even make the judge report today, but it does take away from slush fund around the ballroom, etc. That's, again, what's not in the report, but you do see, you did hear particularly Dave Grush talking about such things. As far as this disclosure goes, the UFO community just refuses to take yes for an answer. Now, there are people, we're getting into the legacy program versus, well, my firsthand evidence goes in a different direction. It could be wrong. Again, many people whom I highly respect. You probably don't know Scott Jones, but as with Ed Mitchell, saying Gary was over, and he is one of two people that I've ever talked to who said, I know somebody who actually was involved with the material. Almost all are friend of a friend. Jim Sullivan is a guy you cannot discount. By the way, he is an abductee himself. Long story, but a very senior CIA official. That's Chris Mellon, who was the deputy director of intelligence. He is one who says, I know somebody who's read into the program. That's with Jay Stratton, who I mentioned before. What's interesting is in the movie I mentioned, Age of Disclosure, each one in the trailer says, I have seen the bodies. I did not see that in the movie itself. But he's one with firsthand evidence, becomes key with OSAP, has interesting experiences at the ranch. I mentioned before, Edward Tiller is with Hal. Hal is recently on Diary of a CEO and is now getting credit for saying there are 4 types of aliens that we're at least familiar with. I don't think that's exactly what he said, but that's something getting attributed to him at the moment. I might mention that next week there's a movie, another one coming out, I think is somewhat better, Ron James, called The Accidental Truth. One that has just come out is Sleeping Dog. This is Jeremy Corbell. That's Jeremy and his photographer at the house when they were actually doing it. A lot of it revolves around John Lear. Many of you will know him, and I think John Lear was just batshit crazy. He had told me, we didn't go to the moon, The new Sandia is moved out west of Area 51, and there's underground tunnels that go out there. But that movie is, again, available at the moment. This gets personal. This is my second sighting. It's the Chris Bledsoe case, and this starts in 2007. He's down on the Cape Fear River. They're going to go fishing, and they build this big fire. And Chris leaves, and he's walking up the hill. And when he gets up to the top of the hill, we're talking a couple of 100 meters, not here is two, and there becomes three UFOs up there. Later, a short time later, he comes back, and he thinks it's about 20 minutes later. I remember he went up at twilight and finds out it's 11 o'clock. And they say, "Where are you? You've been gone for hours." And he thinks it's just minutes. He now thinks probably had an abduction style thing. Chris Jr., who had been with them, is off hiding in the woods understaffed. So they throw all their stuff in the garden. By the way, UFOs are flying over top. They're a terribly complex case, but things landing on the far side of the river. They throw all their stuff up and go up the hill and get chased. He gets home, and what happens is he finally gets home. He has to drop these other fishermen off first. And he sees something out of the window. The dogs are barking, and he goes outside, and something starts chasing him. By the way, he lived on a 5-acre lot at the time. He lives at a different location now. And he runs down, and he finally turns around, stops, and says, "Okay, you got me." And they say, "There's a telepathic message. You don't understand. We're here to help." And then by that time, Chris Jr. shows up. Entity just disappears. The next day, it's around noon. He says, "Gee, I haven't taken my medicine." And he had Crohn's disease very seriously for over 12 years at that time. It's gone on considerably now, and that continues to be true. There's others, again, these things are happening all the time. The reason I happen to believe this case, I had heard it initially, said, "Gee, that's interesting." We had gone back to the original location. My wife and his daughter Emily were along, and we went down, came back up to where the car was parked. It's just getting dark at the time, leaning against the left front hood of the left front fender. And he's pointing out where this happened and that happened. And all of a sudden he stops and says, "Oh, I think they're here." And with that, this thing, within 15 seconds, it pops into view and goes zipping off. And I saw that. And the point was, it was the temporal relationship between him saying, this is, they're here, and knowing it. And again, this is continuing to this day. There were other things that happened in his backyard as another catalpa tree. The tree caught fire from the inside. Now, this was not a fire. This was taken when none of that is there, and yet the smoke is showing up on the film, and people sending clothes in and for healing and whatnot. Now, so this brings up the question of orbs and the relationship to UFOs, and the question is their interaction. Now, Chris now does call him in. He goes to conferences all the time, and almost all the time. I mean, he's getting interactions literally on a daily basis. That was just one. By the way, the whole story is written up in his book as UFO of God. You should know that he comes from a very fundamentalist Christian background, which and has paid a huge price. as his family, because the local community does not like what was going on. So Jim, it turned into two forwards, but Jim Simovan won one and I won one. And I say, if you get around him, people go home and seem to be having this orb sort of thing goes on. Yeah, this is our interspecies communication. And I say, I come down against the ETH or extraterrestrial hypothesis, not because they don't happen, but because it's just too simple. And the point is, we have been reports of interactions with humans and sentient non-humans throughout human history. Like emerging people talking about ultra-terrestrial because you have extraterrestrial, interdimensional, temporal, or time traveler kinds of spiritual entities, post-mortem beings, and the time, but tulpas and things like that. They come up with creations of consciousness, but there's lots of reports of interactions between some sorts of being and sentient non-humans. NASA has got involved. I'm not very, their history has been overtly hostile. I use this, I had talked to this 14, a long time ago. This is an individual who was giving a report of finding life. Now, we're not talking about sentient life. He was going to report at a very high level conference on finding unicellular organisms. And he got supposed to go, and at the last minute, NASA just said, no, you can't do that. And he said, screw you, I've got enough time, I'm retiring. But the point was that the overt hostility to the topic, and that may be changing. We did Bill Nelson. I don't know about the new reporter, but as a former astronaut, that they were at least reaching out and a bit more sympathetic. Those who know John Mack, with John, he agreed, and particularly on the complexity of these reports. Let me go. My points here are that these reports of interactions with non-humans are reported and throughout human history. Frankly, that they fly in on little tin cans is a fairly new wrinkle to a very old story. This is sort of one of the best sellers that you'll find. The other that I find problematic are the number of types of reports. By the way, I think Hal talks about the Nordics, reptilians, of course, Greys, and something else as being part of the interaction. One of the questions is, why is it, if they travel across the galaxies and can get here, this is following on the ET hypothesis, why are they so different? And why do they go to specific areas of the globe? In other words, certain types of ET interactions are reported in certain geographic areas. Yeah, why are this? Skinwalker Ranch, not going to go into any detail except to tell you it is a very, very strange place. As I said, I was with Bob the day he bought the ranch. And one of the things I came up with I did want to include, because it's coming up on something else, is what I call the precognitive sentient phenomena. And there was an it, and I don't know how to describe it, but it was definitely in control. We had these variations, and it could predict how we were going to respond before an event would occur. And then you would get something, you'd have to study that. It says, oh, you like that? Try this. Or we had an early instrument now. Brandon has much better sensor oriented. We NIDS had cameras on doing 24/7, then reviewing it. And things would happen, you go, everything would happen like just off camera. And every time we tried to be predictable, it would it would completely morph. I say this is not unusual, and if you go into history from Loki, Kokopelli, and Pan from gods, but so again, whatever it is, it was in control. We were never in control. Well, UFOs and religionists is getting in some criteria. We don't expect governments to be involved in studying things of religious nature, but we do expect them to do UFOs. I'm going to come to that. Now, we want to go, in my view, this whole area is too big for governments. And what I've done is compare the analysis between research into UAPs and cancer. Both of them are globally ubiquitous. These happen all over the world. There's no standard formula. There's so many different variations, and very, very complex problems. And research in both areas are very expensive, and you have competing priorities. On the slide before on one that says, if you want to fund UFOs, and there's some funding going in, what is it you don't want to fund, particularly when you get into areas, in medical areas of limited cases that have a very limited scope. I say improvement, yeah, I'm less in agreement there, but what I do say is there is not going to be one simple solution to little gray guys from Zeta Reticuli or wherever it might be. But in both government and cancer, governments do not have a lead role, but they have important roles, and they do participate. And they will, the governments are being a bit more responsive when people say they're interested. We're seeing that now with some of the congressional opera. Oh, that sort of thing. Again, I think it's just too big for governments to handle. And you got to remember that it's in control globally, and we can play a role, but probably not the role. But they do bring our sensor systems. Here is a huge bugaboo. There's only a couple people who've ever seen this slide before. I think one of the biggest problems for involvement in the UFP arena is one thing to ask for money to study hard little widgets that are flying around. It's something else to say, I want money to study werewolves. And this brings up the whole area of hitchhikers. I think a lot of the hitchhiker effect is assumed to be associated with the ranch. I can tell you, and if you read, the thing at the Pentagon, the one that George and Jim Lukowski wrote, George Knapp and Colin Kelleher, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. There's a story in there that's 100% real. One of these, again, very, very senior people whom I do know, living in Northern Virginia, like most of the people in the Washington area don't live in Washington per se. And there, days later, but standing in his backyard on his hind legs is a werewolf. I borrowed that picture just to be analogous. But the point is that many people who have been involved with this have started talking about the hitchhiker effect. One that has become known, as I mentioned, my boss at the time, Bob Bigelow. This was a case where he had been at the ranch and came back, and He's in bed with his wife. He's asleep, and all of a sudden she wakes up and here's an entity hovering face to face. You know, I'm convinced that's the one when he said, you know, the ranch is out of here. By the way, should you ever go to Skinwalker Ranch now, you ought to see the releases and NDAs that you have to sign to get in because they're worried about these something. Actually, OSAP, a program, came about much because of one of these things. Jim Lukoski, who had headed the program, and this is where you get the bottom-up push, had been visiting the ranch with Bob, and he's in there in an old building that was there at the time, and he looks through the door and here's a something floating in the next room. Any number of people who have been to the ranch have, again, it's why I use the werewolves as a euphemism, because there are many, many different types of things that occur. If you follow Skinwalker Ranch TV program now, you know, they've actually come up with DNA from a dire wolf, and they've been extended for a long period of time. So my point here is, I think from a political perspective, it's one thing to say, I want to study, you know, hard UFOs that are showing up on sensor systems and that. But when you digress to these other areas, it's going to be very hard to say, I want money to study that. And yet that is where the data take you. But what's the most important question you can ask about these things? As I said, it's what's for dinner. Now, got a limited number of people here talking, you know, who thinks this is a very important area. But to the vast majority of people, it's interesting. They, you know, we know that I suspect an even larger number now of people are, you know, saying, yep, UFOs are real, but how does that affect my daily life? And even acknowledgement is not going to change that. As I've said, confirmation of what you already believe is not a paradigm shift. And people have said, oh, it's going to change everything. No. Does it change everything? No. You got to go to work the next day, go to school, whatever it is. So it may be interesting, but that we're not alone in the universe doesn't change. You haven't been alone in the universe all along. It just doesn't change much. And getting to my bottom line is, I regard, this is from Max Planck, and this is over a century ago, just about a century ago now. So you can't regard, or I regard consciousness as fundamental, that matter is a derivative. In other words, rather than being, you know, something inside your brain that is conscious of things, the physical arose from consciousness. And I think that's the part. And I think the USP, what's happening from a government perspective is that you're getting a tiny, tiny fraction of all of the things that have been reported. So it is my view that the future of UFO research is going to be in consciousness studies, telepathy being the key. Now, one of the questions I asked, this does get political, and I asked this to Jeremy recently, is it too late for a revelation? For most people now, I mean, the government's always been an iffy thing, but they're not trustworthy. We also don't trust organizations. And look, I use there the number of science papers that have been retracted. So there's a degradation in trust in science per se. And you throw on top of that what AI can do for you. So it's, you know, having convincing evidence is going to be extraordinarily difficult. I'll use this where I end, as in my UFO book. The final words are, in the end, it is clear that the universe is far more complex than we ever imagined. We are not close to solving the enigmas posed by UFOs, but rather still are on the front end of defining the fundamental issues and boundaries. with that, sorry, we did that. Went a bit longer than expected, but all right. How do I get out of
Wow.
this?
Yeah.
Stop
So
share.
just yep, stop share. There you go. And there you are. Holy cow, Colonel, that was awesome. Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so it's Q&A time. So if we got where do you want to start, Ann? You want to start there in Fargo or here?
So we can start in Rapids for those of us that are joining today that are new. We take one question from each location. So we'll go to Grand Rapids, then we'll go to online, then we'll come to the Fargo Moorhead, and we just keep going around. So everybody has a chance at each of our locations to ask a question. We definitely have some questions here in Moorhead. So if you're here in person, feel free to come on up and ask your question and be on camera. Or if you're a little shy, not a problem. Just ask your question and I'll repeat it.
Hi, Colonel Alexander. How you doing?
Good. You?
First of all, I just wanted to let you know this is truly an honor to watch everything in your presentation, and just I know a lot about your career, along with Joseph McMoneagle. You two are very high up here in my my realm. So
I didn't do it. I wasn't there.
I think you might. It might have been. No, so my question is, I guess, and it's just something that I've been wanting to ask you or Joseph McMoneagle, I guess, for a while here. And do you know Tim Taylor, the Dragon?
I'm sorry.
He's mentioned in the UFO of God with Chris Bledsoe, Tim Taylor.
Right.
Okay, have you met him?
Who I met who?
Tim Taylor?
No, I have
Tim
not.
Taylor?
No, that name has come up. I have not met him.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering, being like with Chris Bledsoe and everybody, and he, the
Chris
thing that
has mentioned it, and you and several others, but it's not a twain that has crossed.
Okay, it was just the fascination with the metal that he brought. Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to see if you had ever had any interaction with him or anything.
No.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mark Toffel, field investigator for MUFON here. Two real quick questions. TR3B, is it real or not? And have you ever had any contact with Paul Hellyer?
Is the TR3B a real thing?
I don't know, but as I've told people many times, don't be surprised if strange things fly in the desert. Because I'm from Las Vegas here and out there, and yes, they do fly unusual craft. As far as super large ones, I can tell you that I had, I won't go to the general I was talking to, but one of the key guys in the research, aviation research, and asked him not about that specifically, but there was giant craft. And what's the biggest thing we had? And it would not support the TR3B or why. Yeah, you had asked about Paul Hellyer. Yeah, we have crossed swords. I found him. It was stunning to me because he really was the Canadian Minister of Defense. And what he didn't know about the U.S. government and how it worked, I found stunning. So now, on the other hand, I asked him about his sources, and his response was, "How did you ever get to be a colonel and ask a minister about their sources?" Because I found it quite unreliable.
Colonel Alexander, if you wouldn't mind, sir, I would appreciate any sightings that you personally have had yourself. And a little description, if possible.
Well, that was in the briefing. That's the one, again, with Chris Bledsoe. Trying to think, there was one other one, very, very minor, when I was up in Washington, state of Washington, and Jim Gilliland's place there. I was using third-gen night vision devices, and I was watching things going across the sky, and a lot of them were satellites, and then watched this one progress from west to east. and all of a sudden it stopped. And they're going like, satellites don't stop. So that was one. The other was the one, like I say, with Chris Bledsoe. Have had better ones actually in my family. In fact, my brother has accused me and said, you study the things that we do, and having seen various things. Well, I have my son actually was fishing. He's in Florida, and was out on the Atlantic. I did see something come out of the water and go off, but my personal is only those two events.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Good afternoon, Colonel Alexander. Thank you for being here with us and taking the time to educate us. My question is if you could speak on some of your more prominent experiences with remote viewing.
Oh, wow. By the way, I saw that on the Facebook thing that went out. Not sure where we could spend days on that. Have you got a specific question? I mean, that's like like talk about UFOs or something. I mean, it is that broad. I actually have another part of a briefing. These things go together, but this is hours and hours of stuff.
She says perhaps your favorite one.
Wow, not sure. The favorite one. Well, there's actually two people that I recommend for training. One of them is Paul Smith, and some will know. And better known is Joe McMonagle, who was remote viewer 001, natural and the best of the best. Yeah, I guess one of the biggies there, and this has really got the program going. It was still experimental, and he was working with Hal and Russ at SRI. And it was CIA who came in and asked a question about something at a specific location. And again, he tells, well, it's a big building and whatnot. And so they came back and they showed him a picture from a Talon Keyhole satellite. I said, what's in this building down there? And he looked at it and gave them, well, there's a big submarine. There's several submarines, but one of them's really big. And it's double hulled, and the tubes are forward of the sail. And here's a whole bunch of other, technical things that are going on. And so he says, oh, and in 6 months, there's going to be a new canal and it will get out to the ocean. They sent that to Navy boat builders who kind of said nonsense. If you build anything that big, when it went to depth, it would crush. And we don't have any indication of major shift. Well, most of our launches were behind the sail. The sail, by the way, is the big thing, like the conning tower or whatnot. Anyway, a few months later, the clouds parted, the cameras came on, and there was the Typhoon class submarine. And it was just as he had predicted, and we had totally missed the development of it. And I'm not sure, but I don't think there was some under development. It may still be the biggest, but it was the double-hulled titanium submarine. But like I say, the whole room, like I said, that we could go on, we could spend hours on just the topic. In fact, I could pull up slides with that, but I've got them buried below.
Colonel Alexander, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. It's an honor to speak with you. My question is about your reaction or impression to, this was a statement that Lou Elizondo made around the time of his release of his book, Imminent. And I'm paraphrasing, but he said, if you understood all that I know about the impact of UAP, your reaction would be somber. You would feel somber. And then he went on to say, I encourage everyone, connect with your family, go out to dinner, love each other. Do you have an impression or a reaction to that?
Well, well, I know Lou. He's made some. Let me digress to Corbell and Knapp have a program called Weaponized, and there's a recent episode with Jim Lukoski, and in fact he was pitching this book. I don't know if you've seen it. This is just out for about a month. It's called Future Visions. Lukoski has done 3. But he was asked about, the revelation, and his point was one of the reasons they can't, quote, reveal things is they don't understand it. Go back to my closing statement. Whatever this is, it is more complex than we can possibly imagine. The phenomena keep morphing. And, I know what they have seen. I mentioned Jim Lukoski. Not sure about Lou, but others, again, at the ranch having these apparently unrelated kinds of phenomena that don't stop. The same as I mentioned with Chris Bledsoe. I mean, the main thing, there was the initial incident, and it has continued on for years. And it keeps morphing and getting more and more complex. I think there are enough people, and Lou's one of them, who have had experiences and whatnot. They really can't explain it. And so reveal, when you say reveal what? Reveal that we don't know. Kind of we're at fundamental level talking about the nature of reality.
Okay.
If that's useful or not, but it's,
Yep, thank you.
It gets to be that basic.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to know, what do you think is inside the mesa on Skinwalker Ranch? And what is the worst and scariest thing that you've seen there?
Let me have the second part of this again, what's the what that I've seen there?
The worst and scariest part or thing that you saw on Skinwalker Ranch?
God. Yeah. What's in there? I guess you're going to have to watch. The new season just came on Tuesday, and I noticed that they're going to now. They've been drilling from the side into the mesa up, and now going to go from the mesa, from the top of the mesa down, and hopefully try to answer some of those questions. There's already indicating, complexity. From the program perspective, don't want to get too far afield, but you've got to understand that Prometheus is there to make a TV program. Brandon Fugel and folks are really interested in the phenomena itself, which greatly exceeds the parameters of, the TV program. So what's in there, don't know. We never had any kind of thing. What strangest thing? It's hard to. There's orders of magnitude of strangeness that physically happened there. One that happened absolutely on our watch. That's fairly well known. Terry Sherman had stayed on. Remember, this is the NIDS days, so early 1990s time race. It's calving season, and he goes out on Sunday or a sunny morning, and he comes out. Here's a newborn calf, and he tags it in the ways that they tag it to identify it with the mother. You're familiar with the topography. The ranch is perfectly wide open, flat. And then on the north is the escarpment that goes up on the mesa. So anyway, he tags it, he weighs it, he goes across the field, he finds another newborn, tags it and weighs it. He comes back and calf 1 is dead. Not only is it dead, it's exsanguinated and eviscerated. and there's somewhere between 20 and 40 pounds of stuff. It's just totally missing. This is one of the ones where I say the precognitive sentient phenomena. We had George Annette working for us, who had a double doctorate. He was a DMV, veterinarian, had him on site within a few hours. The ear, the ear with a tag has been sliced off. It looks like it's been cut by a laser. So it, yeah, the bones are intact, but the one bone that's missing, all the stuff. And people said, well, maybe the blood, went into the ground. Well, I had contacted George and had them go to a slaughterhouse and get blood and pour it on the ground in a different location. And you go back weeks later and you say, that's where the blood was poured on the ground. So obviously, frankly, the science board looked at it, and the best guess was it had not happened at that location. Now, remember, it's broad daylight, visibility is perfect, shoot rustlers. So, and we also looked at how various predators kill, and none of them would have killed innocent or could account for all of the missing material. But that's one that happened, on my watch. There are a number of others. Again, we were filming 24/7, and it was second or third time lapse. So anything that had to happen within a second and a third. And there were things that happened that just weren't on camera that should have been. It is unbelievably strange.
Hi, hello. Thank you very much for the presentation and insights today. We learned a lot that I definitely did not know before. So I had one question on consciousness, right? Because I suppose that's where all of this, on consciousness, since that's where all of this leads, right? I suppose even if we do formally as a society acknowledge UFOs, then we still have work tomorrow, right? So are there any documents or studies or even tutorials on how to really understand consciousness at the fundamental level? I know all of this is infinitely complex, but
Do you have any simple questions?
oh, sure. I guess
Yeah,
how
there
to
are
advance.
in fact, I think it was the University of Arizona. What was the name? Has I think they're meeting in UC San Diego coming up. And the point is that this is an area that is receiving considerable more attention, and trying to understand just basically what is the nature. From a scientific perspective, of course, we live in a society that believes basically in materialism. And then, if we use we have the Higgs, the Large Hadron Collider, and try to get the Higgs boson. If we can just find the fundamental part and put those together, we'll get it. And of course, what is being suggested by Max Planck and many more now is that our fundamental nature is. I'm trying to think of what would be. Yeah, there's a number of books coming. I'm trying to. I hate to digress, but I'm just not sure of which one we were looking at it. We have to understand that these fields coincide, and there is the Department of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, and what's his name? Tell you what, I will go down and check, because the irreducible mind is I believe the name of the book. Ed, so the first name's Ed, is the guy who wrote it. But again, it's the University of Virginia, and if you look up the the director of perceptual studies. Bruce Grayson, this is where particularly the whole near-death experiences start to integrate. And also doing a lot of work in postmortem communication. And I'm liking. I will send Ann the name of the book. I don't know we break here.
All good.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Have you any knowledge of any mutilations or injuries of humans other than cancer that have occurred from these sightings?
There's a whole bunch of studies around that in Colares in Brazil. Jacques Vallée had studied on that, and I'm trying to think. Actually, in the OSAP program, I don't know if they published that or not, but Colares, Mexico, or Brazil, northeastern Brazil, there were a series of sightings, and people had very deleterious interactions with them. Yeah, the other one, James Fox. There's a movie by James Fox on the case in Brazil. I almost mangled the name, but it's a very famous interaction where people in some kind of creepy crawler came out and supposedly had interactions, and they have the doctor who did it. I forget Fox's latest movie, but it is available on the net. And so those are one that's predominantly, like I said, in Brazil, and has gone on for decades. As you know, on Skinwalker, under Brandon's watch, was that had supposed brain injuries from that. There are people who talk about these things, and I don't know anywhere you have the credible. If you can find, do you know Kit Green? Does that name ring a bell?
No.
Dr. Christopher Green, who has done most of the research for, well, I know he did with OSAP. He was with us. I have known Kit for decades. He's one who actually was one of the primary movers in getting the remote viewing program started back when he was in life sciences at CIA, and then later went to General Motors. But some of his research, I think, is probably available. I know that some of the research came out under when OSAP programs were released. I think there were 30 some that they listed, and these were released quite a while ago.
Colonel Alexander, just one more question is, if you're able to, I guess, how were you recruited for the program in the military?
What?
How were you recruited into the remote viewing program?
I was never in the remote viewing program. I was unrecruited. What happened, A, I wasn't recruited. B, what happened was I was attending Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, which wasn't terribly challenging. And I wrote a story you can find some places called The New Mental Battlefield. And it appeared in Military Review, which was the journal of Command General Staff College. And it was the first time that any traditional military journal covered things. And they covered from remote viewing to psychokinesis and a whole bunch of things. A lot of it was based on, we were concerned about what the Soviets were doing. Remember, this is the bad old days. You got to remember time frame, bad old days. And there was a pretty famous book that came out, Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. Anyway, what happened was I wrote the article, What the Hell, and I submitted it, not thinking that anybody that it would have a chance of getting found. And serendipitously, what happens is the editor of the journal had a near-death experience. So when you talk about out-of-body experiences and things, so it moved from an article to getting published to being the cover article, which didn't raise a lot. And what happened was there was a guy by the name of Jack Anderson, who was a major syndicated columnist in the Washington Post, who wrote what they believe was a nasty article, literally called "The Voodoo Warriors of the Pentagon." They're talking about me and these others. Actually, he got it wrong. So anyway, became known because of that. And then what happened was that I was in the Washington area. Again, I was at a DAIG at the time, and I went to a conference, and there was a woman who was the wife of a retired colonel who was the wife of the Deputy Secretary of Defense, General Richard Stilwell, who happened to be interested in it. So I'm in the Pentagon, and I get called. Now, lieutenant colonels do not go see DepSecDef without intermediary, some flag officer to bob their head. Now, that's not what happened. And I went, so I went up, and it was about 12:30 one day, and Stilwell and I had a very interesting conversation. And he said, "Who do you work for?" And I said, "Well, I'm in DAIG," and knew that. And about 4:20 that afternoon, our chief of staff walked in and says, "Tomorrow morning, you don't work here anymore." I mean, he had stepped in and moved me. Now, the corollary of that story is years later, I ran into a friend who had followed me in Hawaii, who had been in the personnel center in Washington for the Army. And he says, I kept your file in my drawer for 6 months because we had no idea what to do with it. Well, wasn't recruited, but I know that's sort of what happened. The rest was history. I did then work with General Subelbein, and the things we were doing. I was watching what the Soviets were doing at the time, and as that was getting darker, then, and also a key issue we didn't get into, maybe another discussion sometime, was on the psychokinesis. I was doing that. Over my head back here, there are some bent forks that tell a very interesting story, because we were very interested at the time. Remember, again, where you are with the computers, and our interest was if you can bend metal. I would get asked, "Are you going to bend tank barrels?" And I say, "No, I'm going after computers and just make them unreliable."
Yeah, mess them up.
Well, more than you asked for, but actually I wasn't recruited per se. But the point is, and this I think is true, most of these things are serendipitous. You could not follow my career, or my probability of making colonel was below zero. I mean, I had not done the things you're supposed to do, And
no, I get it. I get it. Yeah. But no, I just wanted to, well, thank you very much. It's been an honor to speak to you. Okay. Very privileged. So you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Colonel. Thank you so much for your presentation. I have a question about the shamans that you'd visited with. And I'm wondering about the people that go to South America to try ayahuasca and their claim that they see aliens when they do that, and how that connects to your discussion about consciousness and things.
Is this frozen?
No, you're there.
I'm sorry, that froze.
Oh, okay.
At least on my end. So,
okay, it was probably.
What do you want to know about ayahuasca? I've been there, done that.
You did? Did you? I was wondering about the people that do ayahuasca and claim to see aliens, and how that all ties in with your discussion about consciousness.
Oh, another one of those. No, I have dealt with shamans all over the world. I now admit that I have done ayahuasca, though my wife is much more of a devotee. You do run into, well, I'll tell you a story. She has a world, for like I say, and there's a specific one. I would also issue a word of caution. This is not something to be trifled with, and knowing who your shaman is and reliability is a critical issue. And as this has become more popular, it's also become intrinsically more dangerous. However, having dealt with that, like I say, been in many sessions, most of the time, I'm the one who's not on the ayahuasca, the drug itself, and supposed to doing the recording and whatnot. I would also mention to people this is never going to be a party drug or recreational drug. The side effects are you start running sometimes both at both ends simultaneously, things like that make it. However, the experiences that happen, usually the first few times that you're using it, it's just kind of, wow, look at this. Victoria got to a point where she was going to another world and that they had recognized her and whatnot. Now, we've run into that in many different locations where people have recognized her, people we've never met before, and that. The strangest event that happened here, though, and did not involve ayahuasca, but those same folks, entities, don't know how to describe it, showed up here asking for help. So that turned into a problem. Now we're getting into stuff that this gets the thing I mentioned about the reason that you're going to have problems with the UFO thing. This gets into so bizarre that it's very, very difficult to comprehend and whatnot.
Thank you for your exemplary service and your presentation today. Is there evidence to suggest humans have the technology to interfere with operations of UFO, UAP craft, including the ability to shoot them down? I'll let
The question is about shooting these down?
It was the first question that came in.
Yes.
There have been numerous interactions. Often these have not gone well. I know that the Russians eventually put out the word, do not attempt to intercept or shoot down. There's a famous case, again, over Peru, where things were sighted. And I guess a 20 or 40 millimeter cannon on the aircraft shooting into it. And it was like it was just absorbing them, but had no effect. The case I mentioned with Milton Torres, that's one where he went to ripple the missiles and the thing is gone, Mach 500 instantaneously. There are the Iranian case, again, is one where they went in. What I could never figure out, though, is if he turned on a switch, which means you had target acquisition, so there was an electronic signal, or if he just mentally said, okay, I'm going to shoot. But when it did, it shut down the panel and all the electronics on the cut. But that's the one I said, what amazed me is it spins and it goes off and gets turned back on. I said, I have heard of interactions like the ones, again, in the former Soviet Union where they got crashed. The Mantell case, by the way, is one that still gets a lot of things. Oh, that's early 50s over Ohio, where the pilot is trying to overtake it, and the next thing they know, it crashes. So I don't know that he was actively trying to shoot it, but was trying to intercept. Now, they did, the official explanation on that was oxygen asphyxiation. I ran out of air. It was flying too high for the aircraft at the time.
So the next question that we have in the chat is, Colonel Alexander, what unanswered question keeps you engaged in this topic after decades of research? Thank you.
Well, the questions keep expanding exponentially is one of the problems. As I said, my interests are in how all of these things fit together, currently interacting with Gary Schwartz, recently retired from the University of Arizona, and they're doing work. This gets into the postmortem communication or continuation of consciousness. Yeah, we're looking at trying to develop. You're familiar, of course, with, I'm assuming, with mediums and things of that nature, but trying to bypass that step and are supposedly interacting with some extremely well-known scientists, supposedly getting help from, quote, the other side, what he calls Team A, but looking at a technology approach to, communicating again with what he calls post-material people.
Okay. Our final question is, sir, have you ever had the opportunity to work with or research exotic material?
Personally, no. I'm familiar with the people who have. And of course, one of the problems that you have there is what's exotic, because there are things. For instance, if you again look at Roswell, and there were some interesting programs. I found Jesse Marcel to be, a very straight shooter. Jesse's son, the same, and that goes back to the old stuff that was supposedly retrieved in the Roswell area. But they talked about material that you could, crunch up, and it would return to form and flame resistant. The point is that would be considered exotic, except it all existed at that time frame. Most people didn't know about it. This gets to what one of the things that Bill Coleman had told me about. I mentioned him, and that has to do, again, ties into Roswell, and there were exotic materials, or what we would consider exotic materials, that were used you had to be cut into very specific angles. They were looking for very specific frequencies. The word at the time, this is before Soviets had popped their first nuke. We knew they were on the trail, and that was going to change the geopolitics of the world. And so it was, there's some very exotic materials that were used there that would not have been recognized by people in general.
We do have one last question here in Fargo. And so the question is, what do you think about close proximity to orbs and that being dangerous to human health?
Close proximity, having been in close proximity and with people who do, and I generally say no. Having said that, I have heard of cases that say there's some kind of radiation that they're worried about. There does seem to be, again, in my view, the ability to mentally interact, hence the consciousness. They say Chris calls them. By the way, I might mention, Weechie says as if it was very unique. I'm hearing from more and more people who are having these kinds of interactions. Some may know Bob Monroe of Monroe Institute. I know Bob, and I mentioned that Kubler-Ross was my mentor, the head of my medical, so the one that brought hospice to the U.S. And they were actually calling in UFOs. We're talking early 70s, 60s, actually doing. So to think that this is totally new is not. By the way, can I throw in one other thing that's kind of unrelated, but is, and that has to do with where this is going and why I do not think we've had reverse engineering. And that is, we understand the physical attributes of what these UFOs are doing. And if this can be engineered, the issue is not widgets flying. It is understanding a fundamental different source of energy. And if so, that does change the geopolitics of the world.
You guys all good? Does anybody here have any questions? If not, I have a question for you. Okay. You brought it up, so you're going to have to explain yourself now. Golf Breeze, and you said you're a man in black. I need to know what, why, where, what did you know?
Oh, well, the Men in Black is kind of a cute story. I was physically, I was working at Los Alamos. I was working with people from the Skunk Works. We were delivering a presentation to at Tampa to the Special Operations Headquarters. And the next day we were doing one in Tampa, and then we were coming back and we were flying into Pensacola to do one at AFSOC, the Air Force Special Operations Headquarters, the next day. And we were, of course, dressed literally in black ties and all that, as you would be for the kind of presentation. So we got to the airport, and damned if the storms don't roll in and our plane gets delayed. And I had set up to go to, but I was expecting to go to the hotel, change clothes, and slip back over. But I talked to the guys with me and said, yeah, again, they all knew I was crazy, so they were willing to go along with it. So we get in and get this car, and damned if they don't give us one. This is a midnight green. As close to a black sedan as you can possibly imagine. So instead of, because it's running late, it's dark, and we go to where every night the people are watching us. So that's why I say we show up as literally, here we are, literally the government and from the Skunk Works, Men in Black, if you will. It was very interesting because someone will know Bruce Maccabee, who had been there, did a lot of the research on it. And one of his points that I thought was quite good is, what is it that would cause people to literally change their lifestyle? Because this was one where, the local population would get together and go out every night to watch these things. And it was frequent enough that it was recurring. And sometimes, by the way, not just out there, but they talked about things flying down, getting back to the orb kinds of things, but circling among them on the ground.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. We are just really excited that we had you here today. We really appreciate you taking the time, not only on a Saturday, but on a holiday weekend to come and talk with us.
Pleasure.
Shirley Temple. Yeah. Not bad. Kind of strawberry-ish. Oh, you're still here? All right. Hit subscribe. Hit like. There's another video showing up here somewhere. Why don't you click on that and watch that too? Thanks. Helps out. Wow. Really?
I think that might have been the best MUFON meeting I've been to.